The first pale light of dawn crept over the horizon, revealing a landscape almost unrecognizable. Craters scarred the earth, blackened wrecks of tanks littered the fields, and the acrid scent of smoke and oil hung heavy in the air. Karl Meissner's Panzer IV moved cautiously forward, its tracks crunching over debris. He glanced at his crew, Schmidt, Kruger, and the others, all worn, bruised, and hollow-eyed. Each man had survived miracles and horrors alike, yet the coming day promised no reprieve. In the distance, the rumble of engines began anew. The Soviets, never resting, advanced with relentless precision. Waves of T-34s and KV-1s emerged through the morning haze, seemingly rising from the earth itself. Their numbers defied imagination, and their discipline on the battlefield left no room for error. Karl realized something chilling. The Eastern Front had no mercy, and it had no end in sight. For the Germans, every victory was temporary, every gain fleeting. The Soviets had turned defense into offense, exhaustion into opportunity, and endless manpower into a weapon more terrifying than any single tank. Across the steppe, the sounds of battle began again. Explosions, gunfire, and the cries of men merging into a single, overwhelming symphony of war. Karl gripped the controls tighter, his knuckles white, yet inside he understood the truth that every German soldier at Kursk would come to face. The war on the Eastern Front could not be won through courage alone. It was July 6th now, and the battle raged on. Kursk would go down in history not just as a clash of tanks and men, but as a turning point that shattered illusions of German invincibility. The endless Soviet armor, unyielding and terrifying, had shown the world, and the soldiers trapped in the mud and fire, that some forces, some nations, simply could not be stopped. Karl whispered to himself, almost in awe, "So this is the might of the East." And as the sun rose fully over the horizon, the T-34s and KV-1s continued their advance, relentless, unbroken, unstoppable. Hours turned into a punishing day, the sun beating down on scorched earth and exhausted men alike. Smoke and fire created a haze so thick that Karl Meissner could barely make out the outlines of friend or foe. As the German lines tried to regroup, whispers began to circulate among the officers and men alike. The words were grim, spoken quietly as if saying them aloud might summon the truth too quickly. "We cannot win here. Not today. Not ever." Karl felt it deep in his bones. The same fear mirrored in his crew's eyes. Every wave of T-34s that approached was met with the same futile resistance. Every destroyed Soviet tank was immediately replaced by another, as if the earth itself supplied the enemy with an unending reservoir of steel and fire. Oberst Hoff, pacing in a temporary command post, slammed his fists on the map table. Reports kept coming. Entire battalions were decimated, supply lines shredded, and yet the Soviet tide pressed on, untouched by the destruction around them. The magnitude of the Soviet production effort was something the Germans had underestimated, and now, at Kursk, it revealed itself in full, terrifying force. Karl glanced at the horizon. The field was a graveyard of tanks, but the advancing T-34s and KV-1s continued, their silhouettes black against the fiery smoke. He realized that this was no ordinary battle. It was a confrontation with an industrial and human machine so immense, so tireless, that conventional tactics and valor could scarcely make a dent. The bitter truth settled over the German soldiers like a suffocating shroud. The Eastern Front was no longer a battlefield to conquer. It was a crucible to survive. Every man who remained alive understood that courage could not overcome infinite numbers, that skill alone could not match relentless production, and that sometimes even the finest armies would be ground down by a foe that simply would not stop. Karl tightened his grip on the controls and stared through the smoke at the endless horizon of tanks, a silent acknowledgement passing through his mind. This is the reality of Kursk. This is the reality of the Eastern Front. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows over a battlefield carved from fire, steel, and sweat. Smoke still rose in stubborn spirals from the wrecks of tanks that had fought valiantly, yet fell before the unyielding Soviet advance. Karl Meissner and his weary crew had survived another day, but survival felt hollow. The endless waves of T-34s and KV-1s had left a mark not only on the land, but on the minds of every German soldier present. Kursk was not just a battle. It was a revelation, a moment when the illusion of German superiority on the Eastern Front was shattered. In makeshift command posts, generals scribbled desperate reports, realizing that even tactical brilliance and seasoned crews could not compensate for the overwhelming weight of Soviet industry and manpower. Every destroyed tank, every fallen soldier was quickly replaced by another, each wave reinforcing the terrifying lesson. The Soviets had a depth the Germans could not match. Karl sat in silence, gazing at the horizon. The burned-out husks of panzers around him were grim reminders of what had been lost, yet the advancing Soviet tanks seemed almost impervious to human effort. This was no longer a contest of individual bravery, but a test of endurance against a machine of production and strategy far beyond any single soldier's comprehension. Kursk would go down in history as the largest tank battle ever fought, a monumental clash that changed the course of the Eastern Front. For Karl and his comrades, it was a bitter truth etched into memory. No matter how skilled, no matter how brave, some enemies could not be defeated by courage alone. The T-34s and KV-1s never seemed to end, and in their endless advance lay the undeniable proof that the tide on the Eastern Front had turned. The night fell, cold and heavy, over a land soaked in fire and fear. Somewhere beyond the horizon, the Soviet machine continued to roll, unbroken and unstoppable, leaving German soldiers with a single, haunting realization. Victory on this front was no longer possible. As the dust settled over Kursk, one thing was clear. The Eastern Front was a war of endless machines and unwavering will. German soldiers faced tanks that never seemed to end, a testament to the Soviet industrial might. If today's story left you in awe of history's monumental battles, make sure to subscribe to America in Time for more incredible moments from the past. Hit that like button, share your thoughts in the comments, and join us as we uncover the untold stories that shaped our world. History never sleeps, and neither should your curiosity. And click the video on the right to watch part 1. And click the video on the left to watch part 2.